Got clip, they erase all the shots. They connect the dots. Under the docks. Under the docks. Yeah, under the docks. Under the docks.
If you guys know me, Paranoid American, you know that I couldn't start this series without jumping headfirst into conspiracy theories in particular. That's sort of the pool that I swim in. It's what I know. It's what I know Sean through. It's mostly through like conspiracy theories and music. So this felt like the best kind of like starting point to get into the series is to talk about conspiracy theories. Although after we kind of get our foot in, we're going to expand and talk about sports, music, social issues, all sorts of different documentaries. But for this initial run of Under the Docks, it's all conspiracy theories. Are you good with that too, Sean?
I'm fine with that because that's how I got introduced to documentaries. Smoking a little bit, roll one up, and be like, "Hey, what's this weird thing that we're gonna watch today?"
This is the first introduction to documentaries, was getting into conspiracy documentaries.
Yep, that's the first thing I've ever seen. Was like, "Hey, did you know that the government's corrupt?"
I wish it was like that, but I think my beginning points, everyone had those school film reel, or most people did. At least when I was growing up, they would cart out the little film projector and put in the VHS tape and hit play, and it would just kind of go through images and little beeps after every scene and all that. And then I started watching sort of History Channel or nature documentaries, the little ants and the bees and stuff. But yeah, the first time that I saw a legitimate conspiracy documentary, it kind of blew my mind because it felt like it's got that educational flair, but this is something that I'm actually interested in, not just because it happens to be in front of me, but it also wasn't that well produced either. And that's kind of like a thing that happens with conspiracy documentaries.
Definitely, they're not always top quality, but they have a lot of information that intrigues you. And I guess you're right. The first documentary is probably like when I'm young and those Disney look at ants and this is how a snake eats a rat. And like, that's probably the first introduction to the documentary. But when I chose to watch it, it was interesting, conspiratorial cover-ups and, you know, kind of what we're doing today.
And speaking of that low production quality, this first one that we picked out is a great example of this one. You mentioned that already when we were talking about it. But also, when I first mentioned this, out of all of the hundreds, like infinite possibilities of what documentaries should we cover for the first episode of Under the Docks, and I just went right to Money Masters, and you were like, yeah, bet. Like, you immediately agreed. And I'm just curious, like, what is it about Money Masters that you were like, yeah, that's a good place to start too?
I think it's relatable because some of the conspiratorial ones we might dip down later on, it's not for everybody, right? Like, this is something that a person that's not necessarily into conspiracies could enjoy, minus the production value maybe, but enjoy the actual knowledge that there's a lot of information in there.
A good point too is that I don't know if I would advocate everyone go and watch this entire 4-hour thing. I mean, I hope you will. I hope anyone watching or listening ends up checking out the entire 3.5-hour documentary. But it's also a really good example for this series because I got faith in everyone, right? I trust everyone listening. You're smart. You've got, your priorities right. But I don't know if you're going to figure out how to get 4 hours of your life to actually dedicate the attention. This was kind of perfect if you were, younger, or, someone was rolling up and you were just like, all right, this is going to be the rest of my afternoon. I don't have anything else to worry about. But we're going to do you the service of watching and analyzing this long documentary that you might have the time to watch in its entirety. And we're going to give you all of the most important takeaways from it. Right, so let's plot the course for Money Masters. This, again, it's a 3.5-hour documentary. It covers so much different area. I got to just pick the top 10. And honestly, in this series, we might not always do like the top 10. Sometimes it'll just be 3 or 4 talking points introducing the documentary. This one's a heavy hitter. We kind of came out and took like a big old bite, like straight out of this piece of steak. So here's the top 10 claims made by money masters. I'm going to go through all of them. The first one was that private central banks control world economies, and they kind of highlight the Federal Reserve as one of these examples. But it makes this claim. I think this is the first thing that blew my mind when I saw Money Masters, or late 90s, early 2000s, that the Federal Reserve is neither federal nor necessarily a reserve, and it's named intentionally to sound like it's this official government entity, while it's in reality a private financial sort of corporation.
Yeah, like they point out in the film that it's just like FedEx. It's just in name alone. And it's not in the government blue pages for, like you said, this is the 90s. It's not where you can just Google it, but it was in the blue, not in the blue pages, not in the governmental. And I think this really put it on the map in mainstream of Federal Reserve not being a federal agency.
Yeah, I've read this before in books and everything, but really, this documentary made that particular claim so accessible. And that was one of the first things I was like, that can't be true. That just sounds like some conspiracy nonsense. But it checked out, and that leads into all these other ones were all similar in how big of an impact they made when I first heard all of these. The next one is one of the claims the movie makes, that the Federal Reserve is unconstitutional and that therefore it's some sort of like an illegal entity. I don't know how I feel about that in particular. It's a bold claim. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the legalese. I'm sure that it's come up in court before, but that's a claim made by this particular documentary.
It sounds good, but like you said, it's hard to back it up going through unless someone that actually has the knowledge. And if someone's listening, maybe you have the knowledge, let us know. But from my standpoint too, I don't know. I'm kind of like, yeah, it sounds good. I don't actually know if that's true.
Well, and I'm also a believer of living in the reality that we've actually got and not the one that's on like some theoretical sort of like academic paper. So the reality that we're sharing at this moment, as far as I know, the Federal Reserve is real, and it hasn't been taken down by a constitutionalist. So de facto, I guess it's here to stay regardless.
Yeah, yeah, no matter what.
The next claim is that debt-based money systems typically always enslave the public. This one's hard to argue against, but I mean, potato on like, what do you consider enslavement? I don't know if I would consider me or you enslaved entirely. I mean, you're like slaves to the dollar, but it's a pretty charged word in order to make that kind of a claim. And money has this like abstract concept, but I mean, this is where the conspiracy angle really hits hard. And I know I was vibing with this particular claim when I first saw, like, hell yeah, man, we're all slaves to this system.
Now being older, seeing it, I think I have a different perspective. But yeah, being in 18, 19, because I saw it like in the 2000s, not in the 90s, but like about 18, 19, watching this and being like, yeah, man, this is crazy. What do you mean? Like the dollar's holding us down, man. Like, and I could see where they come from with that aspect of like, yeah, we have to make money and we can only get a certain amount of money. But then it's tough because we kind of enslave ourselves, right? Because we could figure out our own way to make money and we don't have to be a slave. But I'm like loose on it, right? Like I'm in the middle right there. I get it. I get the point you're driving home. I just don't necessarily see it as that way anymore.
Another claim is that bankers fund war for profit, and they make a very, very specific claim in this one. They basically say that the Rothschild family funded both sides of the Napoleonic Wars, and that this is one of just many examples, and that war is always profitable for bankers in some capacity. So we'll do a slightly deeper dive on that particular claim, but this overall concept that wars create money for bankers, that does seem like it's held true for me over my just personal observation over the last few decades. So that one really hit home.
And if you just go through film and TV throughout the years, Game of Thrones is a perfect example where you're seeing everybody fight for the crown. And at the same time, there's a banker that's like, hey, I'll give you this side this money and this side this money, because it's kind of obvious that like someone's going to profit off of it.
This is one of the biggest claims too, is that pretty much all of the main presidents that opposed these banking elites found up on the wrong side of a gun at some point. They mention JFK, they mention Andrew Jackson, they mention Abraham Lincoln, and that all three of those guys were publicly pushing against the banking system and were essentially trying to convert us back over to some sort of non-fiat currency examples, and that they all got taken out right around the times in which they would have gotten some traction on some of these things.
That's where they lose me a little bit. Like, I do think there's conspiracies within maybe their deaths, but I think also it's kind of, there's no actual proof that they were gonna do this. It's all like some imaginary thing, like you behind the scenes that nobody really knows about. That only the guy that knew the guy that knew the guy knew that he was about to do this.
It's nearly impossible to prove intent. I mean, even someone might lie to themselves about why they're doing something, so it's really hard to really point that out. And one of the examples, JFK, right? There's a very specific one that he had this executive order 11110, and this was supposed to change the way that we interacted with silver and silver certificates. Although, from everything I could look into, this wouldn't have been like a make it or break it. This wouldn't have ended the Federal Reserve or global banking or fractional. It wouldn't have ended any of that. It was very like tiny little footnote into something where they were just trying to recapture silver for industrial means versus monetary. So that particular one felt a little bit loose, but again, it's in conspiracy classic fashion. These grandiose claims that every living president that has ever gone up against the bankers has been killed by the bankers. Like, that whole premise is what makes me like conspiracy theory. But you get older and you've heard these claims over and over again. You kind of realize that's part of the storytelling aspect. And yeah, they don't drop. And here's the proof we've got that shows all this is true.
And you can't prove a negative, right? Like, you can't prove a negative, so that's why those theories go like wildfires.
Another one was that the Great Depression was engineered. That's one of the other claims in this one. I've heard this one a lot too, that the 1929 crash in America was essentially triggered in order to consolidate wealth. Now, again, I prefer to live in the world of reality instead of academics and like, sort of just like theories. That's kind of what happened, right? The Great Depression did end up consolidating wealth. In fact, every major global or even national tragedy tends to consolidate wealth. Even the last like big event from 2019 to 2022 consolidated wealth, and you see the amount of money that's being controlled and the assets by the most rich. It goes up after these huge tragedies. So it's hard for me to debate. Even if I had a point to debate this, that the Great Depression was engineered, why wouldn't it? If you were a banker and you had the resources and you knew that this was a move that would improve your standings, it would almost be fiscally irresponsible of you not to engineer a Great Depression.
It's impossible to argue against. Like, I see it the same in the crash in the 80s, the 2008. Like, it seems to be a theme that, hey, we kind of made a couple mistakes. Let's adjust. And if some other people have to lose their wealth and lose money and land, so be it, so we can prosper in the end. That it seems like a human thing. Like, it's not like something far-fetched.
This one is one that I immediately blew my mind, and I 100% believe this one. And I would love to hear if anyone's got an alternate sort of view on this one, but that inflation is just a hidden tax. And man, like once you understand how that particular thing works, one of the ways that it kind of gets described in this movie and elsewhere is that if you go on to like a pay road, for example, you go on an expressway, like at that moment, you're deciding, I want to go faster, so I'm going to use option A instead of option B, and option A costs whatever, $7 or $2, depending on where you're going, and that you're consciously making that. So you're actively getting taxed based on the thing that you want to do at that moment. Or if you go and decide to buy gas, you're getting taxed at that moment. If you buy a pack of cigarettes, you're getting taxed at that moment. Inflation is a way to still add tax to people, but do it in such a slow, ubiquitous way that you don't get to opt in for it. It's this like hidden tax that you don't have a whole lot of say over, and it'll just so gradually become part of everything you buy. So there's no way to opt out of inflation in the same way that there is that I just won't get gas. I just won't buy a pack of cigarettes. I just won't use that expressway.
No, I absolutely agree with you, because we've seen an example of that after the 2020 stuff and everybody got checks. And I was like, yeah, this is great that we got checks. But you do realize that everything will become more expensive because they always get their money back. I think it's like a way of taxing where they don't know. And they've even taken a step further where they now call it shrinkflation, where now it's less. Like you used to buy $10 for 8 ounces of something. Now it's $10 for 4.5 ounces or 6 ounces or so on and so forth.
Imagine if there was a sequel to, or like a reshoot of Money Masters that took all of that into account, like the price of eggs in 2025 versus the price of eggs in like 1995 when this movie came out.
Oh my,
He would have been able to drive this one all the way home, I think.
easily.
Uh, Number 8 was that alternative economic systems have been suppressed, and this is kind of goes directly up against the different presidents that got assassinated. So the examples was that Abraham Lincoln tried to issue greenbacks, he gets taken out. Kennedy tries to issue this executive order 1110, and supposedly he gets taken out. Although both of those things were, I think, originally temporary. There were stopgaps for something else that was currently happening. Even for Lincoln's greenbacks, it was kind of war related. So neither of these felt like they would have been permanent solutions to the Federal Reserve or to these central banks that we've got today. But it does make sense that any alternate system would be suppressed. Again, 95, they didn't know about Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, yeah, I think that a lot of countries seem like they've given up trying to suppress it. Now they're all in. Now they've all got strategic reserves. So I don't know if this one, does this statement still hold true that all other economic systems are going to be suppressed? Because Bitcoin seems to disprove that.
Yeah, I think it only counts for a financial system that doesn't work for people that are already making the money, right? The people that already have the power.
Right.
That's the only difference. Like they're
That's
like,
the
yeah,
most
if that works for me, cool.
No, yeah, we got our Bitcoin. No, yeah, this is the
Yeah,
new
you're
thing. We
good.
got it. All right. The last two are heavy hitters. So the next to last one, I kind of saved one of the best for last, but Money Masters in particular made a whole generation of people familiar with this last name Rothschild, or the Red Shield, and that one of the claims is made is that they were one of these families that were hidden financial controllers of the entire world for the last few generations, if not a couple centuries, and in particular that they ran both sides of that Napoleonic War. And that was how big they were, is they could determine whether or not you won or lost the war based on whether or not they were going to loan you money. We'll get into that particular claim, but this is, I think, the first time that I ever heard the name Rothschild, and they dropped so many of those quotes. One of them is something like, I care not who issues a country's laws. It's only like who gets to issue the currency. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it is like one of the most timeless quotes in all conspiracy that I've heard.
You got it pretty close. And you are absolutely right. To me, in this, like I said earlier, about the Federal Reserve bringing to the mainstream, same thing with the Rothschilds. This particular documentary is very important because them bringing up the Rothschilds, which has connected, like if it was like a coaching tree, like in the NFL, they call it a coaching tree when you have like, oh, this coach, and now he has 10 other guys that became head coaches from him. This documentary probably has sprouted so many documentaries because and books because the Rothschilds, after this documentary, I've seen so many things on the Rothschilds, but this was what I first was introduced to them.
And then the final note that this documentary puts forth is sort of a solution, and the solution that Bill Still mentioned was that a gold-backed currency is really the only solution, and that if we were to just go back to some sort of a gold standard, it would solve most of the problems mentioned. I'm not really convinced on that either way, again, because I'm not educated enough to really understand it, but it just seems like the world that we live in is far too complicated for anything that simple to ever really be true.
Like it's one of those things that I used to believe in as a young adult, but now I don't know how you change it from all these systems from what we work now. Like it just seems like it would be very, very bad if it'd be like a Great Depression again to be like, maybe it would pick back up, but I don't know there's any guarantee of it working. It sounds really good and I like the idea of it, but how do you implement it?
Right. I mean, and they almost make a case in Money Masters that the tally sticks was even a better supply. But I don't know about you. I don't want to roll up to the bank with a whole bunch of broken pieces of wood, and
Hold on.
one of them was left out in the rain, or like you dropped one, and now does it match up with the other side of the tally stick? And so it does seem, and I hope I'm not just outing myself as an absolute shill, but like this whole fiat fractional reserve thing has some kind of usefulness to the like us slaves, right? It obviously benefits the elite like banking class, but it is just beyond convenient in a practicality sense. Like I don't want to just be carrying actual gold everywhere with me.
Oh, and then nowadays, like I said, the system, how it works, where you gonna shave. Yeah, I'm gonna get some Doritos, man. How much? What is that like? Shave some gold off for you. I just don't think it works in the current state of how we live. I like the idea. It's just one of those conspiratorial like wish lists that like we fantasize about, but nobody actually has come up with a way to actually implement it.
So we could keep going on. I had to limit it somewhere, so we'll stop that at 10. They go into all these different financial sort of philosophies throughout this documentary. It's well worth the watch if you want to get up to speed on them. All right. This is time for the hidden treasure and overboard moments. We'll figure out the names as we go here. Got to have some sort of a nautical theme. And I think that these ones do kind of fit because even to myself, I'm thinking when I'm watching a documentary and they make a huge claim or they obviously make a huge leap of logic for the sake of storytelling. I even think to myself, like, they kind of went a little overboard. Or they jumped the shark a little bit. So the nautical theme is already on point. So the hidden treasure of this one is really, I can't think of a single other documentary that'll give you this amount of knowledge about financial systems, even if it's almost 4 hours long. Even though it's that long, it's basically the perfect one-stop shop to get all of that plus that conspiratorial tone. Without that conspiratorial tone, this would be one of the more boring documentaries you could ever suggest someone watch. Hey, here's a 4-hour movie about financial systems. That doesn't hit as much as like, here's a 4-hour documentary about the secret banking elites that are controlling your life. It has that like extra flair to it that makes you want to watch it. So it's either this or you got to read The Creature from Jekyll Island. And Money Masters is a way faster and less painful experience. I suggest you do both. I've done both, but that's really the highlight. That's the hidden treasure of this documentary for me, is that nothing else comes close to matching this amount of information.
And the way that the information may not be like all perfect. There's stuff that we could debate, but yes, ton of it is accurate. It's on point. It's just that maybe there's suggestions of things that have happened. Yes, it's been said, but then how is it interpreted? What Rothschilds really meant by that? And they may have control. There's things debatable, but there's so much information about central banking and the Federal Reserve and how it actually works. The history of currency, which is interesting. Like you brought the tally sticks, like things that were traded beyond. So it gives you a feel of where we've come from to where we are now.
And I remember having to learn about tally sticks in school way back when, but it was boring. It didn't click the same way that it was being presented here. And it's kind of crazy because then it made me go back and like, man, maybe if I should have paid probably not though. Like the class was just boring anyways. The teacher probably didn't care. Bill still cares about this stuff. You won't find someone else. He's still doing podcasts right now in 2025 talking about banking fraud and like financial sector stuff. So you will not find another documentary from this particular point of view from someone that cares as much as Bill Still about this topic.
And like you said, it gives it the spice where the elites are enslaving you with currency. It gives you that feel. That's what keeps you going to watch it. And the information is thorough. Like it's not like he didn't go through the information and like miss stuff. Again, there's debatable points, but there is so much information. Even you could take bits and pieces and use it with your own life. You know what I mean? Or your own financial system or what you want to build. But it's very good examples of how banking works.
The next section is the deep dive. This is where we're going to take one of the major claims from the movie and just figure out, is this real or not? This is one of the mind-blowing claims. And we'll try and do this for all these. For Money Masters, we could have picked like, 10 or 20 of these things, but I'm going to laser focus on one in particular. And this is the claim that the Rothschilds financed both sides of the Napoleonic Wars, that they financed both France and Britain in order to basically make profit no matter who won or lost the war, kind of putting their eggs in both of those baskets. And one of the things that makes it harder to kind of accept is that the Napoleonic Wars start in 1803 and they last until like 1815. The Rothschilds didn't even have their Paris bank set up until 1811. So this is like 7 or 8 years into the wars. They don't even have that bank set up. And essentially in 1805 is when Napoleon was at his peak. Jacob or James Rothschild, he was only 11 years old at that time. And even when Napoleon was at his peak, he was like 13 or 14. So I don't know how closely that particular branch of the Rothschild family had their involvement. It seems that according to Rockefeller accepted, history lessons, that Napoleon got a lot of his money just from local finances. He didn't necessarily have to reach out to the Rothschilds. Now, the Rothschilds backing Britain is absolutely documented fact. It's so odd that there's a plethora of evidence that shows, yeah, they absolutely funded Britain, but almost nothing compared to them funding France, especially when that arm of the family was like 11 or 13 years old.
Yeah, I mean, 13-year-olds, I mean, they could throw their money around. Look at these Sweet 16 MTV things, right?
I guess I want to believe this one. And if anyone has more information about the Rothschilds specifically funding Napoleon during the Napoleonic Wars, post them in the comments and email them, or we'll have a number that you can call in and all this stuff. I want to believe that, but it's one of those claims that I just kind of accepted as gospel when I watched this and believed it for the last 2 decades. And then when I actually looked into this one particular claim, like, okay, how much? What date was the check cut? Like, what were all the different terms of this? It kind of gets a little bit murky and it turns into the trust me bro sources. So I would say that that's sort of the, that's in the deep dive. This is kind of what falls flat a little bit.
Agreed.
All right, ripples and waves, this is going to basically be like the historical and the cultural impact of these different documentaries. And like you mentioned, we wouldn't have had a lot of other mentions about the Red Shield family if this one hadn't popularized it first to a whole different generation. This was also a movie that was released right as the internet was starting to get somewhat popular. There were server rooms, there were people that were digitizing VHS and DVDs and uploading them in the late 90s, the early 2000s. So this one kind of found itself just in that big group of weird torrents of, next to the Hulk and Spider-Man. You might get a Money Masters, who knows? And thank God for the people that were sneaking into those places. But it was this unique moment in time where you could have this on VHS and DVD and have downloaded on the internet, and none of those would have been out of the ordinary. So it appealed to 3 completely different demographics, right? Grandpa's not loading up Napster or LimeWire and downloading documentaries, but he might have come across this at the pawn shop or wherever the hell you got this on VHS.
And like you said, it kind of bring back the Fed with the Jekyll, the Creature of Jekyll Isle, but it also sparked the Ron Paul revolution, kind of like the base of it, right? His was end the Fed and central bankers and the Federal Reserve being the main enemy of it not being an entity. So in pop culture, I'm not saying that they caused it, but I feel like a lot of the people that were in that Ron Paul revolution really based a lot of their stuff on these principles, whether they saw this documentary or something that was inspired of it.
And I would say that without this movie, you don't get Zeitgeist, or at least if you go and watch Zeitgeist, which was the 2000s generation's version of one of these kind of movies. So I guess, Bill still walked so that Zeitgeist could run in a way.
Yeah, it's Zeitgeist is money mastered with good editing.
So let's do like a final verdict here, sink or swim. Does the documentary hold water? And the way that we're going to do this, we got 3 different levels we can rate one of these documentaries. There's going to be like the surface level. This is just very shallow, maybe just skims the surface a little bit. Then there's deep dive, which means, it gets into it. This is like, you should probably watch it. Maybe you can just listen to us talking about it. And then for lack of a better rating system, I'm going to say like 20,000 Leagues is as deep as you can possibly go. So I want to hear what your rating is between those 3 on Money Masters.
Mine is 20,000 Leagues because of the information that it gets. It's the highest rating. It's off the walls, off the charts. Like, you can use this documentary to go all types of places. Rothschilds to JFK to what happened with Lincoln to what the Federal Reserve. It's like a bunch of conspiracies caked into one giant film. And that's how I get my only critique of the film is the production value. But you could tell Bill Steele was doing it all on his own in 94, 95. There's not a lot of technology doing it by yourself. That probably costs a pretty penny. But as far as the information, it goes deep. And like I said, it's just a powder keg of information.
I agree with you 100%. I give this one the 20,000 Leagues. I was a little conflicted just because there are some major claims that are made without a lot of backup, but at the same time, the amount of like real estate that this particular documentary covers, it would have been an 80-hour documentary if every single claim was like, and here's all the research that kind of backs that up. Although if Bill still had done that, maybe he would have cut or editorialized some of this stuff in or out, because now it's kind of funny. Like, for example, I think in this documentary they erroneously mention it as Jacob Rothschild in Paris, but really that was his middle name, and he kind of went by James, not Jacob. And Jacob is another person that lived later on in life. But you see that particular claim and the claim about the Napoleonic Wars being funded restated in so many other conspiracy theories and documentaries and music and all over the place. So you can almost pinpoint that it was either this documentary, it was Money Masters that paved the way for all those things to come, or that they were at least all reading from the same source material. So for that reason alone, though, I mean, this is definitely 20,000 Leagues. It's why we picked this one as number one. It's a hard hitter. It's one that everyone should probably watch, although we've just given you a pretty good summary of the whole movie.
Yeah, like you could just listen to us and then just tell your friends, like, yeah, I've seen it.
What's on the horizon next? I think that we're going to focus on mostly conspiracy theory documentaries for the first few episodes, maybe 8, maybe 10, who knows? But we'll stay in our wheelhouse, and then we're going to get into some very other topics, sports, music, social kind of things. But I was thinking we've got a list. We'll cover Zeitgeist. We'll cover Loose Change. We're going to cover A Noble Lie, America, Freedom to Fascism by Aaron Russo. You mentioned one called All for Floyd. So we'll do some more recent ones. We're going to go all over the place. And then as we start getting more and more people paying attention and watching, we'll start doing some live streams and get some direct feedback and maybe suggestions on what documentaries to watch next.
No, definitely, because I think it's good to start with the pillars, right? Like Money Masters, Loose Change, like the everything that you named. Those are like the foundation of the conspiratorial documentary section.
Yeah, I mean, like I said in the intro, everyone wants to ask what our favorite conspiracy theories are, just because we've been into this for so long. But no one really asks what were the documentaries that you saw when you were growing up that made you want to watch conspiracy theories, period. And Money Masters is one of those heavy hitters. If you remove me seeing Money Masters in the late 90s or early 2000s, I might be like a normal functioning adult out in the real world right now. Like, my life would have been on a completely different trajectory. So I blame Money Masters for that, but I also thank it.
Yeah, I think it because I could also have blue hair and be screaming that everybody's a Nazi. So
All right, we'll see you guys on the next Under the Docks. Peace.
Peace.